What do you think? Is there any guesses that you have for 10 to 20 years from now where other use cases for helium can arrive that is not clear yet? That's quite an interesting discussion.
Look, plenty. And let me also just say that 20 years ago, semiconductors didn't need helium. Now, because the transistors, and this is really cool, because the transistors on the chip have been miniaturized to such a small degree, I believe that the spacing between every single transistor in the chip is 248 nanometers. And you cannot achieve that gap between transistors without helium in the atmosphere while you're using your neon laser to burn the transistor into the wafer. So now that's par for the course, and you can't get rid of helium now that it's crept into the system. I'd say that there are a few potential technologies. Obviously, rocket launches are front and center. There will never be a substitute for helium. They're looking at attempting to mechanically move the fuel through the fuel lines into the Venturi valves. But the fact is that nothing is going to work as well as a natural propellant. So even just from an efficiency point of view, even if they do manage to actually get a mechanical propellant operating, it's going to come with all sorts of additional challenges. So I think, for rocketry, it's here to stay. I would say that in terms of new technologies, the two big ones to keep your eye on are quantum computing, and then obviously in the much, much longer term, fusion. So in quantum computing, you need the ultra cold to stop interference from the atmosphere and from electromagnetic waves around the quantum computer. But you also need the low temperature in order to be able to quantumly entangle all of the particles in order to be able to create your qubits to run the calculations. So quantum computers use, depending, there are 4 different kinds of quantum computers. There's one of them that uses an absolutely insane amount of helium. That's obviously the one that we really like. But that's the one area. And then the second area that I'd put money on in the longer term is fusion. And that's because in order to sustain a fusion reaction, you have to have a 20 Tesla magnet. That's a very, very powerful magnet. That's a really, really powerful magnet. And the only way that you can achieve a 20 Tesla magnet is with liquid helium, cooling the magnets, supercooling the magnets. So yes, fusion does take 2 hydrogens and you ultimately end up with a little helium atom coming out the other side. But the amount of helium that fusion produces relative to the amount of helium that you need to keep the magnets cold, orders of magnitude different. So those things use an inordinate amount of helium. So those are the 2 big technologies. Do I see fusion coming online in the next 2 decades? No. There's a joke on fusion, and that's like, for the last 50 years, fusion has always been 30 years away. It's still 30 years away, but
like flying cars.
Yeah, except we got there in the end.
And just the last question, I'm sure this is a question many investors have, and that is, obviously Renergen is quite a niche player. It's a helium player, and there's not really been anything like that in South Africa especially. So what is the best way, this is obviously more a fundamental question, but what is the best way investors should go about evaluating Renergen? Because obviously with sales, there's probably different cycles with the prices of helium and all of that. So any advice that you'd give, investors for researching a commodity like helium?
So the key over here is that if you look at the nature of the South African Stock Exchange, it's not geared towards junior miners. That's the first thing. The ASX is actually the ASX, TSX, AIM are very geared towards junior miners. So anyone that comes at valuation of a junior mining company, Renergen included in their portfolio, if you're using the same principles that you're using to value other stocks on the JSE that have been producing EBITDA for 10 years, you're going to come unstuck. So the way that investors on the other exchange look at it is really a function of taking a look at what the total value is of what's sitting underground, because that is in essence the breakup value of the company. You take a look at what's underground, you factor in losses in terms of extracting the product. So, you know, if there's 100 ounces of gold sitting underground, then you value it on the basis of not at $1,900 per ounce. You take off some for production, you take off some for mining, you take off some for the metallurgical process in terms of the refining of the gold, operation costs, and then you're left with a number of whatever, you know, call it $100 per ounce, and you got 100 ounces, therefore it's $10,000 valuation on the company. So that's a basic first principles way of looking at it, and looking at a junior mining house. And that's really the one way of looking at it. The other way, the more sophisticated way, is trying to build your own discounted cash flow model. And there you have to assume expenses. You look at revenues, you make some assumption as to what the sales price of the underlying commodity would be, and then you try and put together your own discounted cash flow basis, taking into account some reasonable kind of discounted rate of return. That would be the second way of looking at it. But yeah, you're not going to get there if you're looking at it from the traditional South African investor perspective, which is, yeah, EBITDA, price to earnings multiple. The fact of the matter is that junior mining houses, all junior mining houses, not just us, operate on forward PE multiples. But if you're going to calculate a forward PE multiple, you need to have some kind of an inference as to what future E is in order to work out what your P to future E is.
Interesting. Yeah, that's you know, and it will all become more clear as time goes on, because it is still early days, and you know, you need revenues and all of that, and that's only starting now. So looking forward to that over the next few months and years, and seeing all the progress. All the best, and thank you so much for being with us, Stefano.
Thank you. I do have one little cheat methodology for your listeners, and that's if you had to consider that we've got two people in our data room that are currently and have been in our data room for a while, that have been doing their due diligence. The one thing that you'll notice is that we've actually set a price with the Central Energy Fund, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that if our current market cap is what, roughly call it 5 billion, and if we sell a 10% stake at the subsidiary level for R1 billion, you can quite easily infer what the share price, what the price per share is, and that gives you a very good feel for what the project looks like from someone who has teams and has been in the due diligence, the data room for a while.
That is quite a cheat sheet, but I'm sure our users will definitely go look at that transaction again from the Central Energy Fund. I certainly did have a look when it happened, and there's been quite a lot of activity with the funding with regards to Ivanhoe, the Energy Fund, and Argonon. So definitely progress on that side. So well done on that. Thanks so much for being here, Stefano.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, as always.